and you are down here, then what is going to happen is what Professor Edmondson calls the epidemic of silence, where the people will comply in front of you, and then behind you, they say, man, you don't say that not word. I know you cannot relate to the exaggeration. Right? The very epidemic of silence, where in the age of technology, the leader is speaking in a particular meeting. We all know that the recommendations are not going to work, but because we're fearful, somebody is sending a text message or WhatsApp message to the other and said, see them? And you're laughing because you know of that elsewhere. Am I correct? You cannot relate. So let us prioritize psychological safety, right? Provide choice in task types as far as it is possible. Again, choice is becoming a big thing, especially with millennials and Gen Zers. But my considered view is that millennials and Gen Zers require guidance. And therefore, it's not everything that you're going to have a choice in doing. Sometimes, the very tasks that you do not want to do are tasks that are going to cause you to grow into the very position that you aspire to get into. And so, we have to be mindful of those things as far as it is possible, having assessed their trajectory, having assessed where they are, you give them a choice. So what are some actionable strategies? Strength-based job design. Gone are the days when we just design a role that has from A to Z as the tasks and responsibilities. Instead, let us ensure that from the talent acquisition stage of things, we're identifying where we could possibly place these individuals. And if we are sufficiently agile to change tasks over time, we'll realize that we really can leverage the strengths. The structured feedback and clear performance metrics, I spoke about that. Daily check-ins can be some. Mentorship and peer support networks. That peer support network aspect is very important. Now let's get to the accommodations. Earlier I touched on the gadgets that are in front of you, that some of you were fidgeting with. What are some of the other ways we can accommodate people? There was a time, not so long ago, when we hear it was the biggest thing. We need to get rid of offices, and what we need to do is to have open spaces. Because Gen Zers, millennials like to collaborate, etc., etc., etc. However, that did not take into consideration how they present in the way their brain works. And so there are some people who cannot function in that open space because the crosstalk with colleagues will distract them. Yes? There are others who cannot function with the bright lights. It sounds simple, but it's really how their brain functions. Yes? And so some people require some quiet spaces. You know, you have some people in the organization, give them a back office somewhere that is dark and quiet and do great things. Yes? And then there are others who, what do? They need a whole heap of noise around them. I'm not talking about those who sleep in the dark room. There are others who require the chatter because somehow it enhances their brain. I have a younger sister who, she cannot study effectively without music. And for me, if I hear the music, I just need to hear one word and I go down a rabbit hole. So why did I say that? Why did I use that tune? I'm going to be distracted, so I need perfect silence. Right? Flexible work hours, we have already gone into that. And we saw where the government recently signed the flexible work policy, enacted it. Rather, written instructions and visuals. Again, we're accommodating people in the workspace. And so when we have these meetings, and we simply tell people that, oh, you are responsible for A, you're responsible for B, you're responsible for D. It works for some, but others require written instructions and visuals in order to keep up with the pace. There are others who, to keep on task, they require, for example, a software. ADHD employees, for example, may get distracted very easily. So how do we keep them on task? It's not a matter of them being less able, but they are less less able in terms of their capacity, but they're less able to focus. And so what you do is to strengthen that particular aspect. Alternative forms of seating. Recently I saw where a particular prep school here in St. Andrew installed some seats in their classrooms that actually allow the students to fidget. And they have springs in them and they can go all over the place. And they installed some desks that are higher where the students can actually stand and write. These are very real, impactful accommodations for people who present with neurodivergence. So, unfortunately, we were raised in a society where the teacher told you, have a seat and go for the next 2 hours. How do you tell a 3-year-old, for example, to sit and not move for half an hour, and worse, to hold a pencil to write on a line when certain skills have not even been developed, much less one who presents as neurodivergent? Fast forward, when we get to the workplace, some of the colleagues that you say are constantly moving, perhaps don't even know that this is how they're coping with their neurodivergence. Yes? Who love to stop at every cubicle and say hello and da, 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 da. But they still perform. Yes? Some who, if you pass their office, they're constantly swinging in the chair. Yes? Are they being accommodated with even the right chair? Or with every swing, are they mashing up your organization's chair? These are some simple forms, ladies and gentlemen. But separate and apart from focusing on neurodivergence at the organization level, it is important that we have a conversation at the national level. And the paradigm shift that is required is one that we may have to introduce with legislation. Yes? And so there is a role for legislation and there is a role for policy. As far as legislative shifts are concerned, we're talking about ensuring that we enshrine neurodivergence in our employment discrimination laws. Having our disability legislation specifically pinpoint neurodivergence, and of course, ensuring, for example, that the Education Act addresses specifically neurodivergence. So when you have, for example, a student who is absolutely brilliant, so we're talking about ability now, but finds it difficult to focus on tasks, it means that that student is going to require, at the point of examination and assessment, additional time. Yes? Likewise, in the workplace, you may have people who are able to do a fantastic job on a particular task, but they require additional time. We may have to legislate some of these things. On the policy side, ensuring that we explicitly include neurodiversity in those policies. So having enshrined them in law, ensuring that we enact them through various policies in an explicit way. And of course, this would include clear accommodation processes at the national level. Why do we need to do these things? Simple. Inclusive laws attract global investment, support national productivity, and protect human rights. For the last 10, 15 years, we've been having a conversation about productivity levels declining in Jamaica. Could this be one of the answers to raising the productivity levels in our society? Finally, biting the bullet and facing the realities and ensuring that we address neurodivergence in the workplace. So we're at a conference for HR professionals. So what is our responsibility? Let's start at the point of recruitment. We have to ensure that the very job ads that we put out are skill focused. Currently in the UK, one of the things we're seeing is that they're specifically asking for neurodivergent figures because they recognize the value that these individuals bring to the workplace. We need to have alternative assessment methods. So gone are the days when, the process that we use to select you is that you come and you do 2 interviews, and from the second interview you go on to a smaller panel, to a third interview, and then you do a presentation. There are individuals who may be able to do the job, but are not able to effectively maneuver those interviews. And so, some alternatives could be presentations that they're asked to do from the very beginning. Some alternatives may be, believe it or not, giving them some specific questions or the areas that you're going to focus on so that you front load their brains and their expectation. Front loading has been proven to be one of the most effective ways to accommodate neurodivergent employees. And so even within the workplace, if you're like, confession, and I have some team members here, if you're like me, who I will come today and I have 500 ideas, and tomorrow I want us to move on them, and then next week I'm going to put 5 more ideas on the 500, and I said, Donna Mary is smiling right here. This is my lead for learning and development, by the way. Then you may need someone to slow them down. Yes? The alternative assessment methods may be that you need to front load some employees who can manage the pace of always going with ideas and ideas and ideas. I've been in an interview once where, on the spot, I was asked to do a 3-minute timed speech because the part of the role would be to represent a particular high-level individual on the spot. Now, a neurodivergent person who presents with a particular type of scenario would literally freeze because they were not front-loaded with such a task. Yeah. And so we have to be sensitive to those scenarios. De-biased interviews. You notice I never said unbiased. There are natural prejudices that will come to the table with, ladies and gentlemen. And we have to ensure that we remove those prejudices. And so we may be viewing an individual at the point of talent acquisition as lacking in certain skills because we're biased in a particular way. But if we remove that prejudice, it gives us a perspective to question, could it be that it is something else that is causing this person not to shine in this particular area in the interview. Yeah. Retention and development. We have to have inclusive onboarding. Again, one size does not fit all. And so, the extent to which your onboarding is going to be effective is the extent to which you understand the employee as an individual coming with various idiosyncrasies. Mentoring and sponsorship programs. You are going to need to provide particular support to your employees. And so in the same way that we heard earlier, that certain more tenured, I'll use that term, individuals who are able to spot talent and see the potential in employees may need to hold their hand and guide them in a particular direction. Career pathways tailored to strength. No one has ever gotten great by using their weakness. And so we have to ensure that we encourage people, we build them up, and we position them to thrive where their strengths are concerned. Yes, you want to build the areas that are not so strong, but we need to ensure that pathways are built. Performance management. A lot of times we get so caught up with the performance appraisal aspect of performance management that we forget that there needs to be clarity with the goal setting, there needs to be conversation to clarify those goals, there needs to be tracking of those measures, and as you track those goals, you're giving feedback through coaching and mentorship, right? Right down to reward and support. No longer do we have the luxury of simply throwing people into the deep, expecting them to perform, and then we mark them down when they don't perform. We have a responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that we are building the people. Skill building, I spoke about that. Flex work readiness. We have to prepare people for flexi work. You know, when COVID happened, a lot of organizations implemented remote working and flexi work schedules. But then with remote working and flexi work schedules came a lot of challenges. Now that we have learned some lessons, the question to us as leaders and HR practitioners is, how are we ensuring that we're preparing the next level of leaders to be effective with flexi work schedules. We can't engage them the same way. Remote workers cannot be engaged the same way that workers in the office are engaged. Cultures suffer, organizational cultures suffer, because we're not being intentional about how we engage them. And of course, when you put neurodivergence as another layer on top of that, we have an issue. So neurodivergent talent, ladies and gentlemen, fuels innovation pipelines and leadership sustainability. And so if we start now, what's going to happen when we get to the early 2030s and we have 30% of neurodivergent employees, we'll be better able to treat with them. So what are those immediate actions that we need to take? We need to ensure that we update our policies. So homework number one, you go back to your organizations and you have the conversation with the powers that be to say, look, this thing is not coming, it is here, and we need to deal with it. But in order to effectively deal with it, we need to ensure that we enshrine it in policy. Conduct leadership training. This is a huge one. Leaders cannot effectively lead if they do not know their staff. And this is where relationship building comes into play, because guess what? Because of the stigma associated with neurodivergence, people are unwilling to disclose that, look, you know I have so-and-so. You know I think in a particular way, because they don't want to be ostracized. And yes, HR is supposed to be confidential, but we know for the people who are not here, they may not be so confidential. Yes? Revamp procedures. Hiring procedures, for example, must reflect neurodiversity. We have to engage differently. I spoke about this one, and we have to measure objectively. It is not how you feel or think about an employee who presents with ADHD or autism. Yes? It is empirical measurement that is going to show you the success therein. And there's a particular financial institution in the United States that they have a program specific to employees with autism. And one of the things that they have found is that based on certain roles that they place those employees in, they outperform the neurotypical employee by up to 120%. So some of the time wasted is eliminated because they're going to stay on task and they're not going to stop until they're finished. In fact, it may be a case where what you give the neurotypical employee to do in a week, they complete it in a day. Yes? But once you tell them that work is from 9 to 5, wherever they are at 5 o'clock, I'm done. Yes? But it's part of accommodating them. The productivity is heightened. So what do we want to leave here with? We want to remember that neurodivergence is not a problem, but in many cases it can be a strategic advantage. Inclusive leadership unlocks potential. When we're talking about sustainability of organizations, it's important for us to remember that this thing is here, it is not going anywhere, and there are aspects that can be leveraged. When between policies and practice and culture, we have sustainable inclusion. If we don't embed this thing in policy, what is going to happen is that it is left up to the discretion of this leader who may or may not like to have neurodivergent individuals on their team. Jamaica's productivity can benefit from neurodivergence. And of course, we've been talking about resilience all day. It is about building resilience into the workforce of tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, look at your table again. Don't ask the question, but just know that 1 in 5 employees in the workforce is neurodivergent. The prevalence is rising due to improved detection, not just new emerging conditions. Workforces worldwide will become increasingly neurodiverse, making inclusive leadership and policy essential, not optional. And of course, better inclusion will lead to stronger productivity. I did tell you that at the end of the presentation, you will ask yourselves, am I neurodivergent? So let's go in a chorus. After 3. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Somebody somebody answer before they ask the question. So ladies and gentlemen, the question is, what are you going to do about it? Now that we have elevated this into the conversation, the national conversation, what are we going to do about neurodivergence in our society and in particular in our organization? And if we intend to make Jamaica the place you want to work, live, and do business, as is our vision 2030, then there cannot be a place to live, work, and do business without effectively addressing neurodivergence in our society. Thank you so much.